In 1972, the United States government shut down a medical study. It had been running for 40 years. The cure for the disease these men had existed since 1947. The doctors knew. They never told them. 400 men, 40 years, a cure sitting in a cabinet, and not one of them was given it. This is the Tuskegee study, and this is what your government did to 399 men in Alabama. The study was called the Tuskegee Study of Untreated Syphilis in the Negro Male. It was run by the United States Public Health Service in partnership with the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. The official goal was to observe what happened to the human body when syphilis was left completely untreated. Over a long period of time, 399 men were enrolled who already had syphilis. 201 more were enrolled as a control group without the disease. None of them were told the truth about what they had. None of them were told the truth about what was happening to them. And none of them ever agreed to be part of a medical study. They were told they were being treated for bad blood, a vague local term that covered everything, from tiredness to anemia to syphilis. The doctors used this deliberately. It kept the men coming back, without ever understanding what they were coming back for. To make sure they kept coming, the government gave them things: free meals on examination days, free transportation to the clinic, free burial insurance for men with nothing. These were not small things. These were the difference between coming and not coming. The study needed them present, so it paid for their presence in the currency of their own poverty. There was a nurse named Eunice Rivers. She worked on this study for its entire 40-year duration. She was black. She knew these men by name. She drove them to their appointments. She brought them food. She sat with them when they were sick. She attended their funerals, to the men in the study. Eunice Rivers was the human face of something that had no human face. They trusted her completely, and she spent 40 years making sure they stayed in a study that was quietly destroying them. She was not a monster. She believed she was helping. She believed the study had value. She believed the men were receiving better care than they would have gotten otherwise. She was wrong, but she was the kind of wrong that comes from trusting the institution above you more than the people beside you. And the institution had no intention of helping anyone. In 1928, a Scottish scientist named Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin. By 1943, it was being mass-produced. By 1947, it was the standard treatment for syphilis. One course of penicillin could cure the disease completely. The men in Tuskegee had syphilis. The cure for syphilis now existed. The doctors running the study knew this, and they made a decision. They would not tell the men. They would not treat the men, because treating the men would end the experiment, and the experiment was more important than the men. This is not a suspicion. This is not an interpretation. This is what the records show. The decision was made deliberately and documented professionally and filed away in government offices, where it sat for another 25 years. Then the war came. When the United States entered World War II, 250 of the men in the Tuskegee study were called up for military service. The draft board identified them, flagged their syphilis, and prepared to treat them before sending them overseas. The study doctors intervened. They contacted the draft board directly and had all 250 men removed from the treatment list. The United States government, on one side, was drafting these men to fight for their country, and on the other side, was making sure they could not be cured before they went. The war that gave penicillin to soldiers across the Pacific was actively blocked from giving it to 250 men in Alabama. They went back to their farms. They went back to their examinations. They went back to their free meals and their burial insurance. And the disease kept moving through their bodies, the way the doctors had always intended it to. The study was supposed to last 6 months. It lasted 40 years. By the time it ended in 1972, 28 men had died directly from syphilis. 100 had died from related complications. 40 of their wives had been infected. 19 of their children had been born with a disease their fathers were never told they had. For 40 years, the United States Public Health Service held an annual review of the study, looked at the numbers, looked at the deaths, looked at the infections, and approved it to continue. Not once in 40 years did any official review recommend stopping. In 1966, a man named Peter Buxton joined the Public Health Service as an interviewer. Within months, he discovered the study and raised his concerns with his superiors. He was told the study was sound and to leave it alone. In 1968, he raised his concerns again. In writing this time, more formally, more urgently, he was told again that the study was sound, that it served an important purpose, and that he should leave it alone. Peter Buxton left the Public Health Service, and he took what he knew with him. In 1972, he gave the files to a journalist named Gene Heller at the Associated Press. On July 25, 1972, Jean Heller's story ran across America. The United States government had been letting black men die of a curable disease for 40 years so it could watch what happened. The story did not cause outrage slowly. It caused outrage immediately. The study was shut down within days. The men still alive were finally given treatment. They were between 60 and 94 years old. The aftermath moved slowly, the way justice always does. When it is 40 years late, a class action lawsuit was filed. In 1974, the government settled for $10 million, divided among the survivors and the families of the dead. There was no criminal prosecution. Not one doctor was charged. Not one official was held accountable. The men who ran this study retired on government pensions and died in their beds. In 1997, 25 years after the study ended, President Clinton stood in the White House and issued a formal apology to the 8 men who were still alive to hear it. One of them, Herman Shaw, was 94 years old. He had enrolled in the study in 1932. He had trusted a government doctor in a small Alabama clinic 65 years before, and now the President of the United States was telling him he was sorry. Herman Shaw said he was glad to be here, and that he hoped it never happened again. He died 2 years later. The study ended, but what it left behind did not. For decades after 1972, Black Americans enrolled in medical studies at significantly lower rates than any other group. They visited doctors less, they trusted institutions less. They were more likely to delay treatment, more likely to refuse vaccines, more likely to die of conditions that were entirely treatable. Researchers who studied this gap gave it a name: the Tuskegee effect. The study that was supposed to generate data generated something else entirely. It generated a distrust so deep and so rational that it is still measurable today. In death rates, in hospital admission numbers, in vaccination statistics, the men of Tuskegee were lied to. And because they were lied to, the people who came after them stopped believing, and that distrust has cost more lives than the study ever documented. We tend to think of medical experiments gone wrong as things that happened in other countries, in other eras, under other flags. But this study began the same year Hitler came to power in Germany. It ran through the civil rights movement, through the moon landing, through Watergate, through disco, and into the age of the personal computer. The men enrolled in 1932 were still enrolled in 1972, still coming to their appointments, still trusting the people who told them. They were being helped. They were not helped. They were used. And when the cure arrived, it was kept from them deliberately. Not by monsters, not by madmen, not by people who did not know what they were doing. By doctors, by officials, by people who wrote careful notes and attended annual reviews and drove home at the end of the day to their families. The most frightening thing about Tuskegee is not that it happened. It is how completely ordinary the people who ran it were.